Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Should we tell you the date? It's star date. All right, I can't translate it to star date. Come up with something. It's Thursday, September 24th, 2020. Time for another show, if you will, if we're allowed to. I don't know. The peaceful transfer of Wednesday into Thursday. Something enshrined in our Constitution, and we're all glad to have the opportunity to participate in it. I can't guarantee that it goes peacefully necessarily, though, because, all sorts of things have to happen in the background. School has to go on remotely, and of course I know Gil will be looking forward to the daily opening of the Coke can, which you'll hear in the background at some point. Those of you wondering who haven't taken the time to write into the show asking about what is that can that's being opened every day, at about more or less the same time, one guess put forward that it was a Red Bull being opened by our young student looking to get wings, I guess you would say, if you wanted to use their advertising line, their tagline, for his school day. And no, that's not happening. He could care less about flying through the school day, I think. But no, just that's a morning Coke being opened by Mrs. Kagro, I guess we could say. How about that? Anyway, that's a good breakfast treat. Everyone should enjoy it. I always wondered about that. I don't find it all that odd either. And some people still think that's really a crazy thing to do, to drink Coke for breakfast, whereas other people think it's really weird to take your caffeine, put it in dirty water and boil it, and then drink it, which I guess is safer than putting it in unboiled dirty water. That's true. I enjoy coffee as much as the next person, but I try not to do caffeine in the morning. And as a result, I am here on an even keel to discuss the President of the United States' refusal to guarantee a peaceful transfer of power should he lose the election, or for any reason, really. So that sort of seems like a big story. I know you wouldn't be able to tell from the front pages of the major newspapers around the country. Many of them have a story on it, but it's not the story, which, I don't know if I'm ready to fault them just yet, because there are so many things which I think probably there would be disagreement about whether or not it's the story or not. It's kind of the whole point of the Constitution of the United States, but, opinions will differ in terms of whether or not it's the top story of the day. Your top story could be COVID, of course. That would be legitimate. Your top story could be the, I don't know what to call it exactly. Those so far partial results, I guess. There's no point in calling it real results in the Breonna Taylor case and reaction to it, because we're right back where we started from, to no one's real surprise, of course. But, yes, here we are. I guess authorities in Louisville have come around to the conclusion we knew they would all eventually come around to, that, you can't be held responsible if you kick in the wrong person's door and order them to comply with your demands without identifying yourself, and then they get scared about who you are and you have to shoot them. However, it would be inaccurate to say that no charges were leveled whatsoever. It's just that, in a supreme irony or a playing out of exactly kind of what you thought might happen, the charges leveled against the police who killed Breonna Taylor include recklessly shooting into the apartment of some neighboring white people. So, that can't go without comment and without punishment. So it's a difficult day and a difficult time to deal with things. And so many of the swirling controversies could legitimately be billed as today's top story. And of course, so far, I will say this, they've held it together reasonably well so far from reports, considering what provocations there are for, lighting Louisville on fire for various reasons. Armed militias once again patrolling the streets, and we should probably get away from, I've seen some good suggestions on language, people saying you should get away from pretending that they're militias. That carries a much different connotation than armed street gangs, which is what's actually going on here. So we'll be doing our best, I guess, to give you an accurate picture of what's happening there. Greg Dworkin has rounded up some of today's stories. There's probably 16 to 20 or so, which should get top billing, but didn't. And, that'll be the theme of today's show. Stick your hand in anywhere, pull out a random sample. One of them is a Constitution-ending crisis that didn't get enough attention. Good morning, Greg. Which ones have you got?
Constitution-ending? You mean it'll end the Constitution?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, sure.
I mean,
let's talk about
it'll still be there, but
it'll still be
if
there.
You're not.
You're right.
That
what's going on in Louisville is like big, and it certainly deserves top billing. But it took a while for the New York Times and the Washington Post to even get the peaceful transfer of power comments from President Trump, where he said we'll have to see, even onto their front page website.
Yes, well,
at least it's there in both cases. It's there. I actually highlighted it this morning with a little red arrow, just in case you were having trouble finding it, because it wasn't at the top. But over the next few days, it certainly will be. As a matter of fact, Political Playbook.
We'll all take turns.
Tiger Beat on the Potomac says the news cycle today is going to be absolutely dominated by the president's suggestion there might not be a peaceful transfer of power.
Yes, just not yet.
It'll be all the chatter in the hallways of the Capitol, where many lawmakers are just weeks from being on the ballot themselves.
Yes.
Which, of course, is an important point there.
Right. They all went blind, by the way. They haven't read the story yet when you ask them.
Well, but a lot of them have, and they're actually starting to make some comments this morning. Actually, first out of the box yesterday. And yes, you could say it's a little wishy-washy and it doesn't exactly get to the point, but we're talking about Republicans here. First out of the box was Mitt Romney, who said fundamental to democracy is the peaceful transition of power. Without that, there is Belarus. Any suggestion that a president might not respect this constitutional guarantee is both unthinkable and unacceptable. So that's pretty good.
Okay.
Yes, what are you going to do about it since you voted to impeach him? That's great, but now you're allowing him to pick a judge. But that judge story is actually being pushed aside by everything else that's going on, which is not what the Trump campaign wanted. They wanted to use it to rally Catholics as if Joe Biden isn't Catholic, but that's another story. We'll get to that. Next is Liz Cheney. We're talking about leadership positions here. The peaceful transfer of power is enshrined in our Constitution and fundamental to the survival of our republic. America's leaders swear an oath to the Constitution. We will uphold that oath. And then on the other side, which is why you want them to be on record for this, are ex-officials like Scott Walker. I don't have his quote directly in front of me, but it was something along the lines of, you're making too much of this. Everybody's allowed to contest things. You can't decide. You can't disarm unilaterally before we even have an election.
Yes.
We're not talking about deciding who won. We're talking about what happens after that's decided. So
true also.
Scott Walker's a weasel, and he's just trying to change the topic. That's not what the discussion's about.
I mean, peaceful is a big part of that. Scott,
right,
what about that?
Right. And then Lindsey Graham on Fox this morning, quote, says he's confident there'll be a peaceful transfer of power, though there may be SCOTUS litigation. And the direct quote from him is, the court will decide, and if the Republicans lose, we'll accept the result, but we need a full court, and I think that's possible before the election. So according to Lindsey Graham, voters don't decide who wins. The court decides who wins. Okay. And in fact, our Republican court decides who wins.
Yeah, we'll do it that way instead. I think that could be in the Constitution. So,
yes, you have a chance to vote for Jamie Harrison, and you should, and this is why.
Right.
And Graham was on Fox News trying to raise money because he says, Jamie Harrison's getting a ton of money. My opponent's getting a ton of money because everybody hates my guts. Well, that's true.
Was there a suggestion of what to do about it? Or?
Well, give him money so he could win.
Did he say so? I'm just curious.
Hard to tell. According to
well, then it's not going to work.
Understand, Jamie Harrison should get money, and if you want to give money to Lindsey Graham, you should let the courts decide that after the election.
All right.
In fact, if you want to vote for Jamie Harrison, go ahead and vote for him. And if you want to vote for Lindsey Graham, think about it, and then at the election, ask the court what you should do. I think that's absolutely the best way to handle this.
Oh. All right. Just
it's
checking
crazy
it all
stuff.
off here.
It's crazy stuff, and I think everybody ought to be on the record on this. David Frum is absolutely right. I fired Comey because of Russia. I asked Ukraine and China for dirt on the Biden family. I want to choose the third Supreme Court justice to help my reelection.
Sure.
Trump doesn't hesitate to explain what he's doing. He says it. You should heed it. And you should.
Yeah. He is pretty open about it. He doesn't really understand the idea of hiding the ball on this, and I guess that's good.
Anyway, so let's look at Jake Sherman in Playbook, because Politico is pretty good about getting the pulse of what's going on in Washington, which is completely different than like the United States, but at least we have an idea of what the reporters are thinking.
Fair enough.
Playbook. Are we a banana republic?
Yes.
Okay. That's it.
Oh.
That's the tweet. No.
Well, all right.
Like 11 more. With 40 days left until Election Day, it seems as though the United States is well on its way to becoming a banana republic.
I do like bananas. I'll admit to that much.
By the way, I have to throw in here, don't forget, it was Brian Karem who asked that question.
Oh.
He's the guy that the White House tried to get credentials pulled.
Oh, yes. Right.
He keeps asking good questions.
That banana. Get him out of our republic.
Exactly. The president will not commit to a peaceful transfer of power. That's really the headline.
Yeah.
We're going to have to see what happens, and you know that. I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster. The president suggested White House might reject the Food and Drug Administration's more stringent standards for a vaccine. That won't help because, as Amy Walter points out, the Cook report shows that most people don't trust Trump on this. And by the way, he's also going to North Carolina today for a speech on health care, and people don't trust Trump on health care either. Well, I told you what, we're looking at that, said Trump about the vaccine and the FDA. That has to be approved by the White House. We may or may not approve it. That sounds like a political move, he said. We can't let the FDA decide the science because that's political. If I do it, it's science, says Trump. Go figure.
Okay. I like that he's got some scientific certainty to it.
One of the obvious big stories of the day. 2 police officers were shot, both alive, after a prosecutor declined to charge the cop who shot and killed Breonna Taylor in her home with homicide. In Buffalo, pickup truck drove through a protest. In Denver, driver strikes at least one protester in Denver following Breonna Taylor rally in March. Police appeared to run over a man's head with bicycles in Seattle.
Wow.
This chain of events unfolded in another country in another era. The State Department might express concern and give you a travel warning. We as Americans would say we're glad to live in the United States, but alas.
Yes. Right.
And then he finishes with that comment. The news cycle today is going to be absolutely dominated by the president's suggestion there might not be a peaceful transfer of power, as it should. It's just a remarkable statement and can't be left unchallenged. So I hope it's not just the reporters in Washington who should be doing this. It's reporters in the state houses in places like Pennsylvania who ought to be getting Republicans there on the record as to, WTF.
Yeah, I would think so.
Because that's
simple, easy
where,
question.
if there's going to be fighting, that's where it's going to be, well, we have a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature, and whose slate of electors gets to win. It's a steel cage death match, and everybody's armed with lasers. So we'll see. I mean, if there's going to be a fight over this, that's where it is. And, of course, the best way to avoid all of that is just get out there and vote. Michigan's voting now. They just started voting today.
Oh, well, congratulations.
So, get out there and get online and wait your turn and make this a landslide. We'll get to that after the break probably in terms of the polling came out, which is actually pretty good for Biden. And make sure that he wins and wins big enough so that, it's much less of an issue. So that Lindsey Graham doesn't have a chance to take it to court.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd be happy about keeping him out of court, certainly.
So we were talking with my friends overseas and in other places. I think Illinois may be voting today, too. I'm not sure. But certainly Michigan is. And obviously North Carolina is doing the absentee by mail, but they'll be doing in-person early vote fairly soon. And most of North Carolina voting is done pre-election. So all that's important. And we have, of course, expats who are voting now from overseas. And I think that, it's fair to say the thing that I'm going to miss most about this election season is the opportunity to score and pick up a couple of Girl Scout cookie boxes when you go vote.
Oh.
I'm voting by mail, so I won't be able to do that.
They, I guess they don't do any sort of online or mail ordering of the cookies, do they?
I don't know. We'll have to see how they react to that. But I'm just so used to having a little booth. There's no electioneering, but Girl Scouts, well, they get the coveted spot,
Yeah.
walking to vote, so everybody gets a chance to
that.
buy Girl Scout cookies.
That's odd. I wish. Why don't we get with our
those
Girl
little
Scout
capitalists?
cookies?
They know exactly what they're doing. They get you coming and going, literally coming and going from your car.
Yeah. Oh, I wouldn't mind having that here. They're not there on election day. That would be a great tradition for us to have.
They're always here on election day. That's how they get out the vote.
I don't know how that we don't have.
I'm going to Girl Scout cookies while I'm there. I guess I'll vote.
They should be able to vote by the purchase.
Yeah.
If you buy the Thin Mints, you're voting for this one. You get the idea.
Yeah.
It's as official as anything else, and there will be no fraud. Nobody wants the cookies they don't like.
I happen to have a story about that from 2017, so I'm just going to send it to you because it's fun, so your readers get to see it. Get your favorite Girl Scout cookies after voting in Stratford.
Huh.
That's the way everybody does it here in Connecticut.
That's a great idea.
Everybody does it.
I don't know when our cookie season is, but okay. Maybe I don't know. Maybe they're busy voting. I have no idea why we don't have that.
Yeah, I don't know. All I'm saying is you should. That's all I'm saying.
So make voting day a national holiday and get cookies lined up. Okay.
Exactly.
Got my notes.
So there's other trickling in. There's other Republican comments about that as we go along. I think all of that is important. I think Steve Stiers, Republican from Ohio, had something to say about it if I could find it. But, people are, awesome. Making the right noises. They're saying the right things. Some a little wishy-washy-er than others. But they're there, and that's all good.
Constitution or whatever. Yeah, okay. I'm glad they have things to say about the basic, fundamental founding principle of not only this country, but self-determination around the world.
Right. So let's put a little fine point on it, what I mentioned about Amy Walter. As Trump heads to North Carolina for a health care speech, here's what the latest KFF Cook political poll shows about North Carolina swing voters. On protecting pre-existing conditions, Biden plus 26, and lowering drug costs, Biden plus 9.
Okay.
And it comes from a story in the Washington Post. Trump looks for ways to win over voters on health care after failing to deliver on promises.
Okay.
Which is part of the big deal, He made a lot of promises. He didn't deliver. Now what?
All right. I don't know. Does that matter? Do we have elections or something?
Something like that. Matters to some people.
Terrific. All right. Well, we'll see how he wants to play that one. We'll go from screwing them over to winning them over. It's a big swing.
Yeah. Well, it's the long-awaited pivot.
I knew it had to happen.
Became president,
Right. Not the pivot on peaceful transition of power, but okay.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in the real world, on September 24th, 2020, this comes from Bloomberg, Trump retreats from advertising in key battlefields. President Donald Trump's campaign has canceled $4.5 million in ad buys this week, raising more signs of trouble for his reelection effort, even as Democratic nominee Joe Biden expands the advertising footprint. Faced with a shrinking cash balance, because Jared apparently has pocketed it all, Trump has pulled back on television ads in all but 3 states where the race is close: Arizona, Florida, and Georgia. And his ads have disappeared from must-win states like Ohio and Iowa, where he and Biden are essentially tied. Listen, if I told you 2 months ago that Biden and Trump would be tied in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Ohio, and Iowa, how would you say the race is going?
I would, if you told me, I would say the race is steady. The polls are not changing.
Right. But
am I surprised about those states?
For Trump. Florida, Trump won. Georgia is a red state for Trump.
Yeah.
Ohio was a red state for Trump.
No, I would be shocked.
Iowa was a red state for Trump.
And
Biden's picked up essentially 6 or 7 points nationally, and almost that much in these swing states.
Right. Well, I would be surprised. I'd be shocked. I'd want to get very excited about it. But again, if it was you, I would say, well, I want to prove I've been paying attention. The polls are steady. They're not changing.
Right.
Don't mark me wrong.
If you want to do, we'll talk a little bit about polls, though. Let me give you a really good thread
on
poll reading just to put all this in perspective so that
They're
when
steady.
we start looking at the actual polls after the break, you can put all of this in perspective.
They're not tightening. That's the other thing I would have to say. It's
Yeah,
okay
you have
to say
spell
so.
tightening, alternating a small cap and big cap. So you have an idea that some
Yes.
crazy person is writing this. That's the sarcasm font.
That's
Small
yeah.
cap,
Okay,
big cap.
that helps.
The
Not everyone
polls
knows that.
weren't wrong, says Carl Allen.
Which ones?
You just read them wrong.
Oh.
We're talking about 2016 here.
All right.
But it applies to
your
all
fault.
polls. The
Okay.
spread in a poll matters some. Are you up by 6? Are you up by 3?
Right.
But a
I'll take Biden in
50-47
5.
lead, a +3 there, is far more robust than a 46-40 lead or +6. Okay? You're better off 50-47 and leading by 3 than you are 46-40 leading by 6.
Oh, yes, I see.
Right? Why?
All right. Why?
Well, people see a poll average at 46-40, and then the result finally comes in, and it was 47-49, and they say those polls were wrong.
yeah.
Nope.
No.
Nope.
They do say
Okay.
it.
Here's the most important question. What do you think the polls are measuring? Seems like a silly question, but think about it. What do you think the polls are measuring? They're measuring preference and plan. And what don't they measure? How the undecided voters are going to decide.
Okay.
If you can figure out how the undecided voters are going to decide, and that includes whether to vote at all, then you would know who's going to win the election. But you can't know because they haven't decided. So if somebody's 46-40 and all the undecideds break the other way, then you could still wind up at 46, still lose. The polls weren't wrong. You got the 46 they said you were going to get. And what they didn't figure is what the undecideds are going to do.
That's true. People like to ignore the undecideds because if you're interested in polls, you probably can't believe people are undecided.
Right. Now, you can, and again, it's usually whether I vote or not which candidate.
Right. Okay.
So you have to go back and take a look and see where's the actual number falling. Is it 51, 52? I don't care who the undecideds break for. If I'm 52, I win.
That's true. Even
Right?
there's no
52,
room for
48, it's only 4 points. Yeah, but there's no way. Unless people change their mind. And at this point, people aren't changing their minds.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that can
Okay?
happen. It just
More undecideds means more uncertainty, more variability. And 2016 had a historic number of undecided voters. It's one of the many, many reasons this isn't 2016.
okay. Yes.
Clinton's leads in swing states, in these particular ones, Florida, North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Ohio, Missouri, Texas, Virginia. Okay. They were anywhere from a +1 to a +6 lead, but they didn't have her polling any higher than 46.8. Remember the 46-40 versus,
Right. Well,
51.
50 is the number you need.
And while I'm not a
51.
fan of lumping declared third party, Carl Allen says, with undecided, it doesn't take a mathematician to see the gap could feasibly be made up, because in those states we're talking about, like Florida, Clinton 46, Trump 42, undecided and third party 10.9.
Yeah.
Right? If you get that down to 2%, you have a better idea what's going on. If somebody's at 50 and the other person's at 48 with 2% undecided, you have a better idea what's going on.
That's true.
So when you're looking at these polls, you got to look at where's the top number, like where is Biden? Is he over 50? Is he close to 50? Is it 49? And then the other thing to look at is what's the number of third party or undecided? And then you can look and see what the margin is.
All right. I think that's a good explanation. A lot of people just sort of doing the glance at the newspaper over breakfast. Oh, Biden's ahead.
Okay. And then let's the author here talks about another interesting thing, which I think is true. 2016, he says, introduced me to a term I hadn't heard before, the double haters. Right? People who didn't like either candidate.
Okay.
These folks are mostly moderate or conservative, older, low, middle income, and cared about jobs. And these double haters broke for Trump by 20 points in 2016.
They have a lot of hate, the Trump people.
Hindsight bias, and all people say, well, duh, of course conservative undecided voters would favor Trump. But that's not the point.
Oh.
These undecided voters ended up voting for Trump. The ones who were undecided who favored Hillary didn't vote.
Yeah.
So it isn't just a question of who do you think they're going to break for. Undecided includes, are you going to vote at all?
That's right.
And if your voters decide to vote for you, even though they hate you, and my voters decide not to vote for me, yeah, they hate me, they hate the other guy too. They just say both sides and they don't vote at all. You win.
Well,
right? The major difference is looking at 2020. Double haters tend to be younger and liberal, with a notable uptick in black double haters.
Oh.
And at far fewer undecided voters. And there's a case that those undecideds actually favor Biden. So the question is going to be, do they vote? That's why when you look at Florida and say, oh, well, he's not doing that well with Latinos, Hispanics, is that because they're younger Latino Hispanics who tend to make up their mind later, and they're undecided, and they haven't decided whether to vote or not, and that where the problem is. In other words, it's not so much that everybody decided to vote for Trump. It's that they are trying to decide whether or not to vote for Biden, whether or not they're going to come. Are these Bernie people? Are these third-party people? Are these newly empowered, just to Florida from Puerto Rico and just registered and not sure what's going on? There's a whole lot going on here that makes it very difficult to get an individual poll and say, this one number in the subgroup here tells me everything that's going on. And with all of that, Biden's essentially tied in Florida or leading by a point.
All right. Well, not a bad basis to start from.
That's not a bad basis to be from. That's exactly right. Same is true with Texas, where people don't usually vote.
What's wrong with them? Why don't they do that?
And if you're Latino, you're not always voting.
Yeah. Well, many reasons for why that might happen, and not enough questions about.
After the break, but it's an awfully interesting way to think about it.
It is. It is interesting, and it's something that we just tend to ignore. Because what do you mean undecided?
We've covered it, but it's good to remind you.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to Patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue our exploration here. We've good reminders, I think, of what we need to look for. Just spend a little more time lingering over the polls than just checking the top line numbers and what's the spread between them, and realize that, okay, well, if they're both sitting in the 40s, low 40s in particular, if one of them's in the, what does that mean? Okay, leading, yes, but how many people have yet to make up their mind? I would overlook that every time, I think. I've gotten used
even
to
if you don't
go
back and look at that, just look at the numbers. In other words, okay, this is 42-37. That tells you,
yeah, right,
a lot versus like 50-46. So Carl Allen finishes up. So back to the numbers, back to the polls.
Okay.
Stop looking at the margin and look at the numbers. Not all margins are equal. A 7-point margin is great, but 44-37, is that the same as 50-43? No. Think of it this way. The undecided's got to go somewhere, and the polls only capture decideds.
Yes. When
people, analysts included, talk about polling error, they're talking about the margin, and that's not accurate. You can have a margin of error. Maybe I when I looked at the decideds, did I get the decided right plus or minus 3? But the important point is the polling error, so-called error, or how it compared to the actual result later, has everything to do with those undecideds and where they went.
It is a good point.
So back to before, what do polls measure? The preference of decided voters and how many undecided voters there are. So you only get preferences from the decided voter. You can push the leaners with the undecideds and get a sense of that, but it's not quite the same thing as the preference of the decided voter who's decided to vote and decided to vote for somebody. That's a little bit more firm. And what do polls not measure? The preferences of those undecided voters.
Yeah, you can't measure that, really.
You can't. By definition, you can't do it because they haven't decided yet.
Yeah, right. Well, come on.
Okay,
really,
so then he gives some data about how that works and stuff, and I'm not going to go over that, but let me give you an example of how this works. James Holman tweeted last night, an internal GOP poll showed that 28% of battleground voters said they would be more likely to vote for Trump if a SCOTUS replacement is confirmed.
Okay.
28% of battleground voters say,
more likely.
I will vote for Trump if you can get me my judge that I want. 28%. And 38% said they would be less likely.
Right. If you do this, I won't vote for you.
Right. So is that better for Republicans or is it better for Democrats? This fight, according to the poll, is slightly better for Democrats with the enormous caveat that 28 versus 38 leaves a whole lot of people who really don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right? So there's no way you could look at this and say this side has a distinct advantage. But you can look at it and say, well, this isn't overwhelmingly for the GOP. In fact, if anything, the other way.
Or for anybody, for that matter.
And so if it's a wash and Trump is losing, that's not good for him. And 52% said the Senate should hold hearings after the election. So the sentiment with those undecideds is likely to be, although it doesn't measure it directly, again, not necessarily super favorable. So it's like the Kenosha situation. Afterwards, the pundits immediately rushed to say, oh, there's been a problem, and I saw violence on television. What's all of this with violence on television?
Right.
This must be good for Trump. It turned out it wasn't. And so every time they rush to say, oh, this is going to be good for Trump, polling sometimes indicates, not so much. In fact, you could argue, as we were talking about in the first segment, things have actually been fairly steady.
Aha, that part I remember.
All right, so now let's look at some actual national polling that came out yesterday. All right, this is from Navigator. All right. If the general election for president were today and the candidates were Donald Trump, the Republican, and Joe Biden, the Democrat, for whom would you vote?
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty basic polling question.
All right. 42 for Trump, including the leaners, and 53 for Biden, including the non-leaders. Remember what we said about margins and numbers here.
Right.
You can look at the margin all you want to. You can even go back and find out that the undecided's not sure is 3%. But the point is that Biden's at 53. No matter how that 3 decides, Biden's still above 50.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example of why it's important to look at the numbers and the undecideds. And by the way, that's pretty consistent. August 24th, 54-41. August 31st, 52-43. September 14th, 53-42. And today, September 21st, 53-42. Now, the difference between the 14th and the 21st is in between. Unfortunately, RBG died, and then we had a breakout argument about what to do about it. And we went from 53-42 Biden to 53-42 Biden.
Oh.
Just thought I'd mention that.
Polls are steady. Okay.
Quinnipiac, in the race for the White House, the former vice president leads President Donald Trump 52-42 among likely voters. These numbers are unchanged from a September 2nd national poll when Biden led Trump 52-42.
That's what unchanged means.
What's the margin? 10. But what's the number? 52.
Right. Okay, because
So go back and look at the undecideds if you want to. If Biden's 52, he could lose them all and he'd still be at 52.
Yeah. But Trump would be higher, but still not 50.
Yes. And so, these polls are going to tighten because Republicans are going to come home. What? Democrats aren't going to come home?
Okay. Yes, they probably will. But yeah.
The
home is smaller.
But this explains what we're seeing and why we're seeing it. Likely voters give Biden better scores than Trump on 6 personal traits in the Quinnipiac poll, by the way. 49-43% Biden is honest. 59-35 Trump is not.
Yeah. All right.
50-42 Biden has good leadership. 55-43 Trump does not. 58-36, Biden cares about average Americans. 53-45, Trump does not. 56-37, Biden is level-headed. 61-36, Trump is not.
Well.
And then finally, 65-30, Biden is intelligent. 52-44, Trump is intelligent.
Oh, okay.
A split
Trump
says
is not.
Biden does not share the values, and 56-41, Trump does not share their values.
All
So
right.
when you look at the personal characteristics, Biden ties or wins on all of them.
Yeah.
And so if you're
And
who do you
does
want to
so
have a
with
beer
majority.
with voter, you're going to go with Biden. Biden versus Trump on the issues. Likely voters were asked who would do a better job handling 5 issues on handling the economy.
Yeah.
Trump's big issue that he thinks he's going to win with. Trump 49, Biden 48.
No 50s there.
On handling the military, Biden 49, Trump 46.
Okay.
On keeping you and your family safe, Biden 51, Trump 44. On handling the response to the coronavirus, Biden 55, Trump 39.
Oh,
On handling racial inequality, Biden 56, Trump 36. See with that over 50 or close to 50 rule in your head now? You're just
Yeah.
looking at these things differently.
right. And you find out where, okay, well, and it'll help you spot, I guess, if there are what you could call problem areas, you'll spot them. I don't know that they're
Right.
that problematic, but 48,
Exactly.
that's not bad.
So
But-
again, another
but it
10-point
ain't
lead.
50.
So here's a third one.
Okay.
Marquette Law School actually did a national poll, not just
Okay.
a Marquette,
Why?
Wisconsin poll for which they're famous. It's like Ann Seltzer did a national poll, not just an Iowa poll.
All right.
Okay. And if the election for president were being held today and the candidates
is.
were Joe Biden, the Democrat, Donald Trump, the
They
Republican,
are.
Joe Jorgensen, the Libertarian, and Howie Hawkins, the
Really?
Green Party, for whom would you vote? Biden, 50, Trump, 40.
Wow. And that's what the other candidates in the question as well. That's
Yeah,
nice.
vote for someone else, 3, would not vote, 2.
Okay.
There are people that are undecided and will simply not vote. Looks like 3 out of 5 will decide to vote in the end. But most people have made up their minds, and the vote for
Yeah.
someone else would not vote is only 5%.
and I'm only here for the cookies. 2%.
Right.
All
So
right.
now you have 3 Biden plus 10 polls that came out yesterday. Okay, and then here's another one, which happens also to be a Biden plus 10. It's a little different. This is and that's in addition to the USC Dornsife sine wave poll, which is also Biden plus 10. So there's like 5 Biden plus 10 polls that came out yesterday, and then a 7 and an 8. There was YouGov. There's a couple of others. But he's doing fine in terms of national polling, and it's steady as a rock.
Okay.
So this one is Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. 2020
Polling?
presidential election, Trump versus Biden voters on the issues in their vote choice.
Okay. Health issues,
Okay.
I guess.
And so that's also a 10-point lead for Biden.
All right.
But interestingly, likely voters' top issues in deciding how to vote for president by presidential vote preference. Okay, total likely voters, what's the most important issue? Economy, jobs, 38%.
Okay.
Number 2 issue, schools and education, 37%.
Yeah. And that's a
COVID-19,
COVID question.
35. You
Those
can't
two are
separate
together,
COVID-19 from schools and education right
Yes.
now,
That's what I thought you were going to say.
right? Police violence, 35. Racial discrimination, 35. Terrorism, 34. Gun control, 32. Healthcare, not including COVID, 30.
Okay.
All right. So these are all important issues to voters. If you're a Trump voter, economy, jobs is 1 at 37, and terrorism is 35. Taxes is 3 at 31. These are Republican voters. Schools and education, 29, though. So that's actually up there, even though you can't find COVID on the list at all. Abortion's 24, so it's like number 8.
No.
It's tied for 7th, actually.
Okay.
With Biden voters, number 1, racial discrimination, 48, COVID-19, 46, police violence, 45, schools and education, 42, economy, jobs, 40, healthcare not including COVID, 38, gun control, 35, environment, 34. So environment makes it up in the top 8 for the Biden voters. Environment and COVID are nowhere to be found for the Trump voters. And the number 1 issue for Trump voters is economy and jobs. The number 1 issue for Biden voters, even more so than the Trump voters on economy, is racial discrimination. And stuff that happens like in Louisville isn't going to really change that. So I thought that was interesting. And then if you're going to look at economy jobs, they actually drill down a little more and they say, okay, what do you mean by that? Jobs, 63, the financial health of businesses, 18, inflation, 13, the stock market, 3.
Who are we asking?
Don't know other is the rest, 1 and 2. So when you're talking about what do you mean about economy jobs, what you mean is jobs.
Yeah, right. That's
right? That makes it just like really
So economy and jobs? Yeah, I mean,
right.
Jobs.
How do you feel about Nickelback and
the
jobs?
other part.
I am, it's my number one concern. Oh, you must really care about Nickelback. No.
Not so much as jobs.
Not so much. It's like 99% jobs, 1% Nickelback.
I mean, I don't know. That was the question they asked. I don't care
That's
about
the question,
at
right?
all.
So, what question? The
One
answer
guy.
you get depends upon the question you ask. But this does a nice job of, separating that out so you have a much better idea what's going on there.
They get the other answer sometime. But how many people you have to be in Nickelback to answer that way?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Likely voters' rating of their community's plans for handling public school reopening and the education of students.
Right.
By vote preference.
Barking as well. Yeah. Okay. What do people? Well, we have to let her out first. I don't know.
Somebody drove by in the street. So, likely voters' approval. Total likely voters strongly approve their locals' handling of it. 23. Somewhat approve 40. Somewhat disapprove 16. Strongly disapprove 18. So, for the most part, people are giving the benefit of the doubt to the locals for trying to figure this out.
All right. This sounds about right.
Okay. Strongly approved for Trump is 23, just like strongly approved for locals is 23. The difference is that somewhat approve is 40 for local and somewhat approve is 22 for Trump.
This is
strongly disapproved for locals is 18. Strongly disapproved for Trump is 36.
Okay.
Right? So 52
Trump
total disapprove of Trump, whereas it's more like 34% disapprove for the locals. So the nationals are getting a worse rating on what to do about schools than the locals are.
I see. Yes.
Total ratings of handling of COVID-19 by presidential vote preference. You can separate out the Trump and Biden voters, but we're talking about total voters here. That's what we did in the last one. Public health leaders approved 60, disapproved 39. Federal government approved 44, disapproved 55. President Trump approved 42, disapproved 57. So when Trump says he's going to overrule the federal government and he's going to overrule public health leaders, that is not a popular position to take.
Yes, I believe he said as much specifically yesterday with regard to vaccine.
Yes, and so it's not a popular position. COVID-19 voters top COVID-19 issues. So if you decided that COVID-19 is your issue,
you're going to
what
drill
do you
down on
care
this,
about?
huh? Okay.
Competency, well, it's a public health poll, so they're
right. Yes, that's why they're so, okay.
But nobody else does this, so I think
Chan.
it's really interesting to go over it. Total COVID-19 voters, the competency of the federal government in addressing the outbreak, 43 is the top issue.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, this isn't approval or disapproval. Is this your top issue?
Sure.
Competency of the federal government in addressing the outbreak.
43, right?
Okay. Decisions the federal government has made about shutting down or reopening businesses and schools is 30.
Okay, niche version of the same issue.
All right. So what do you care about more? Whether the federal government is addressing the outbreak or the bottom line decision about what's going on with schools? Right? The total, they're most concerned. The biggest issue is the government competent?
Yeah. Well,
but for Trump voters, that's only 18, and decisions about whether or not the schools and businesses reopen is 48.
Yeah. We don't care about whether it's done competently. We just care whether it's done.
We just want the damn businesses open so we can sell guns, okay?
Girl Scout guns. That's an idea.
Bit of an exaggeration there, but you get the point. Just like a totally different worldview there. Likely voters' views on how an announcement by President Trump of an effective and safe vaccine would affect their presidential vote choice, 86% would not make a difference.
Okay.
Make you more likely to vote for Trump? 7. Make you less likely? 6. People have already made up their mind, and they realize he's FOS.
Yeah.
And they don't really care. It doesn't make any difference. You can say whatever you want, dude. You're lying.
Yeah, that's really something. But I think that's the most realistic approach to it. Okay. I mean, a vaccine forthcoming should be a sort of a minimum basic expectation that you were president when someone else did the work and found the vaccine. Okay, I'm not going to really credit you for that.
How an announcement by President Trump of an effective and safe vaccine would affect your presidential vote choice. Okay? So 86% of the voters say it doesn't make a difference. But here's the funny part. Okay? Trump voters.
Yeah, that's right.
15% say they'd more likely vote for Trump if he did this.
Okay.
1% less likely. And 84% say it wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah. It's interesting. Very honest answer from them. I really thought
for
that they would
Democrats,
say, "Oh, that would
Biden voters,
totally do it for me."
Make you more likely to vote for President Trump? Unregistered. It's too small.
I was going to say,
can
they really have a zero?
It's an asterisk.
Wow.
Like
you
this,
don't see that a lot.
Nobody. There's like one guy.
I just wanted to let you
misunderstood the question.
Yeah,
make you less likely.
I felt bad for this
10% wouldn't make a difference. 89. So everybody says this is not an October surprise. Forget about it. Not working. Not going to happen. It's going to be as far as a political statement.
Yeah.
About as much of a dud as the Ron Johnson report that came out that you've already forgotten about because it was not important enough to mention.
Yes. That's
remember the one that was going to change the election?
Right. You told me it was a dud, so I forgot about it. But yeah, no, it's I wonder if that's the sort of polling that they would pay any attention to in the White House. I don't know if it'll reach their desk, but would they understand what this means? That no matter who you tell and no matter what you tell them about the vaccine, they don't care. Even your own people aren't going to. They might celebrate. They'll have a rally. I guess this is maybe a good analog to the meaningful. The deep meaningfulness of boat parades, they will cheer. They will say, "President Trump, you're my hero," but it won't have changed their minds. So you check with the other people. No, they definitely won't change their minds on it either. Really, it's a waste of time. I mean, get a vaccine.
Total waste of time. Forget about it. You don't even need to be meddling here because it's completely wasting your time. It's like for you campaigning in Mississippi, Mr. Trump. Why are you doing that?
Just so for all the people who think, Trump, he's crazy like a fox. He knows Americans' secret political instincts like the back of his hand.
He's got the finger on the pulse, right? Yeah. And it turns out, no.
He still thinks that this is the winner, the case cracker.
Right, and it turns out it's not. Nobody cares. Healthcare voters' top healthcare issues, not including COVID-19, in deciding how to vote for president. So if it's not COVID-19, but you are a healthcare voter, what do you care about? High healthcare costs.
I guess so.
Right, 48%, and the problems of the nation's uninsured, 21. Not really different between Trump and Biden people. So that's why he's in North Carolina today talking about a healthcare issue. Nobody's going to believe him.
That part.
Because nobody trusts him, but that's why he's doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. All right. Well, so that may have shown up in another poll as well. And so they figure it on that. I guess it would be interesting if they read this one and still said, the vaccine's a winner. I don't believe them on that, but...
Right. Likely voters on the responsibility of the federal government to make sure all Americans have health care coverage. Total likely voters, 61% say it's a government function. 34% of Trump voters and 85% of Biden voters.
Hey, all right.
But there's a third of Trump voters agree with that statement.
That is odd.
Right? And the same is 25%, 26% of Trump voters are good with the Affordable Care Act. 91% of Biden voters. And overall, favorable 62, unfavorable 37, the Affordable Care Act, which had so difficult a time getting passed in the first place.
Yeah.
Is popular with Americans, and so for Biden to make that a centerpiece of the Supreme Court really means they're taking away your health care is smart.
Yeah, and well planned. They always said that you might not think it's all that popular now, but give it some time and people will get used to it, and then it'll be very difficult to take away. I mean, the mechanics of taking it away are still simple, but the upshot of taking it away, the backlash is...
If you said that immigration is your biggest issue...
Yeah...
then what issue do you really mean? Right?
Race?
Immigrants or Nickelback? I mean, it's important to tease these things out so you have a sense of what they're really talking about here.
Yeah.
The U.S. government is not doing enough to aid unauthorized immigrants living in the U.S. 30% of total immigration voters said that.
Not doing enough.
Yeah.
Huh.
The number of unauthorized immigrants, 25.
Yeah.
Some other concern, 41.
What? Okay.
So the number of unauthorized immigrants in the country today, for people who picked immigration as their top issue, is only a quarter of those voters.
Huh.
Which is why the caravan didn't work to elect Governor Gillespie in Virginia.
Yeah. I guess that's it. That is interesting. Why did it take us so long to figure that out?
Because everybody got scared about it. I have to say, a lot of the vote, I'm looking at these plus 10 Biden, like 5 national polls yesterday that said Biden was up by 10.
Yeah.
And I said to one of my political friends, this feels a lot like 2017 and 2018 in a lot of ways. And he said, how? And I said, remember 2017?
No.
The polls said that Northam was ahead. Right? And everybody said, yeah, but Gillespie's going to win.
Did they? Yeah.
Because, we don't trust them. We don't trust those voters, the caravan thing, Well, the polls said that Northam's ahead. It actually turned out Northam won by about what the polls said, maybe even a little more.
Yeah, well.
In 2018, we had a plus 7, plus 8 Democratic generic.
Yeah, right.
Well, I don't know. It's getting close to the election, and it doesn't feel like it's growing. I don't know. I'm not really sure the Democrats are going to take the House the way like we thought they were going. And then what happened?
1, they took it, and then 2, a week later, they took it even
more.
bigger. Yeah.
I mean, so there's just Democrats are like that. The numbers are good. I feel pretty confident in the numbers, but now it's close, and I'm biting my nails.
Yeah. I guess
Republicans, we're down 37. We got this.
They're very confident like people. That. Yeah. One thing that they do have their finger on the pulse of is how unsure of themselves Democrats are, and how worried they're going to be.
Every damn time.
Right. Huh. Well, he knows very well. All
right. Abortion. They got a lot of good issue things here, and we don't do enough issue discussion, so that's why I'm honing in on this one. A majority, 57% of likely voters who said abortion was extremely important believe abortion should be legal in all or most cases. That's obviously relevant for our Supreme Court discussion that we're having right now.
Sure. I thought you were going to surprise me, and people are going to say their top issue
legal
is
in all cases, 25. Legal in most cases, 32. Illegal in most cases, 24. Illegal in all cases, 19. They want to put a 19%er on the Supreme Court, and so that's what the fight's about. But most people don't agree with that.
That's
okay. Majority of Trump voters, 57%, believe abortion should be illegal in all or most cases. A majority of Biden voters, 59%, believe abortion should be legal in all or most cases. So that's it. The rest is detail, but I just thought that was an interesting topics of policy discussion that we often don't have. And the closer we get to the election, the harder it is to have a policy discussion.
That's true.
Why aren't we talking about Medicare for all? Because we want to win the damn thing, all right?
Yeah.
Shut up and wait 2 months.
I guess so. That was very interesting. And, it reminded me a little bit of when we used to talk about polling on the Affordable Care Act and the people who disapproved for whatever reason. And then when you ask them why, a huge percentage of them
didn't go far enough.
Yeah, right. So now we have the same phenomenon going on. I was almost expecting you to tell me, 60% of the people polled on abortion said they want more of them, and there's not enough happening. Really?
Right. And so now, with all of that done, we'll finish off with this morning's New York Times Siena polling on Iowa, Georgia, and Texas.
Complete opposite.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now that you have a sense of what people want in the country and how to read these polls,
like a good idea. I should learn that. Yeah.
Let me give you some numbers here. So, New York Times Siena poll, Joe Biden has made significant gains in states Donald Trump won handily in 2016. Iowa, 2016 result, +9 Trump.
Yeah.
New York Times Siena this morning, +3 Biden.
That is significant.
That's a 12-point swing. On the other hand, what are the actual numbers? 45-42. Okay, here's your quiz. What does that tell you?
Yeah, and it tells me that there's plenty of room for late-breaking decisions from people who are going to be
good.
Trump
You
leaders.
get an A+.
Got it. All right.
Okay, you may have a Pop-Tart.
All right. Ooh,
we were talking about breakfast. I didn't have a chance to weigh in on that. But
okay. Thank you.
Pop-Tarts.
I'll be right
so,
back.
Georgia was +5 Trump. It's amazing that Iowa was more Trump than Georgia.
Yeah.
But it was. Georgia, +5 Trump, now tied.
Okay. 5.
Who else says it's tied? Ann Seltzer, the best pollster in Iowa, says Iowa's tied. And this is +3 Biden. Georgia tied. AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll of Georgia, tied. It was +5 Trump, so that's 5 points in Biden's direction. But it's tied at 45-45. We know a tie can go either way. Right. We also know that a 45-45 is telling us that there's maybe 10% of the population still has to figure it out. And in this poll, in the write-up, they go on to say a lot of these are younger, more liberal, people of color, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Biden's got to feel good about Georgia. And then Texas. Texas was +9 Trump. A +9 Trump is a tough thing to swing. It's now +3 Trump.
So 6, okay. Right?
But it's 43-46. Right?
Okay.
It's not +3 Trump 50-47. And what did we learn? There could be some surprises in Texas. And Texas is particularly difficult to poll. And they went on to say in the write-up that if they talked about people who were, say, I'm definitely voting, I'm most committed to voting, if you look at those people alone, it's tied.
Okay, well, that is something because you might
Texas
think...
can be a surprise. Texas is a definite surprise. It costs a fortune. It's huge. So Biden's not all in on advertising.
All right.
But, these are really strong Biden numbers. To be leading in Iowa, to be tied in Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay. And to be only 3 points down in Texas with some awfully good pollsters telling you that that's the case with a bunch of undecideds in each of those three things. And then go back to the poll that suggests that, if anything, Democrats and young women are more mobilized by the Supreme Court fight, and then throw on top of that, and Biden is making it a fight over the Affordable Care Act, which most people like, you got to feel like you're in pretty decent position. So, no, it's not done. No, it's not won. No, it's not over. Nobody's saying you should be complacent. These are pretty darn good numbers for Biden.
All right. Well, I guess so. And then to find out that among the undecideds, the leaners were split, that's pretty good. I'll take it. I'll go into the election with that. However, we're not there yet. We all have
9 in 10 of voters in all 3 states have made up their minds. So this is not going to be all of a sudden Biden's stuff collapses. It's not going to happen.
All right. Well, we're a little bit behind on our music, so it's actually into our break.
See you Wednesday. Bye.
Okay. Will do. And thanks, everybody, and welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just taking care of our housekeeping at the last possible second. And our musical cue, which usually tells us that you're out of time, you need to wrap up, and you're coming back from the break, was off. I don't know. I went, hit the button, everything was supposed to go, and sometimes if you've leaned funny on the keyboard somewhere along the line, the soundboard thinks you have asked it to always pause every single thing you would ever want to play, and then you have to convince the computer that that's not the case. So, all right, a little bit of an engineering nightmare that'll make for a difficult edit later on, but those of you live, well, there's nothing we can do about it. So what do you do in a case like that? You press on, and there's a lot to press to. Press 2 if you're interested in the rest of the show. Otherwise, press 3 and leave us a message, and we'll see you on... you will see tomorrow. Greg will see Wednesday, as I mentioned to you yesterday and neglected to mention to Greg in the meantime that Monday will be off the air in terms of a live show anyway for the Jewish holidays, specifically for Yom Kippur. That's the holiday it will be, and my obligations lie elsewhere that morning. So, but no shortage of stories. Even if we cram 10, 15, 20 of them into the next hour, there'll still be no shortage of stories. Let's try cramming as many of them in as possible. There's a lot to do. One quick news hit we can bring you. This fun piece of COVID-19 information. Missouri Governor Mike Parson now tests positive for COVID-19. Entertaining in a way, because another one of these Republican anti-maskers who was sure that COVID news was being overblown. I don't know if he went as far as some others in telling his people in Missouri that it was a hoax, but they certainly haven't been taking it seriously enough, and he personally hasn't been taking it seriously enough. And guess what? Wasn't wearing a mask, wasn't urging others to, as Missouri was surging and showing up periodically on my lists of top 10 hot spots in terms of new cases per day, or in cases of sometimes in cases in the state per million in population, and no surprise that it would eventually catch up with the governor because the virus doesn't care if you're a VIP at all. Let's see. The Hill describes it this way. Missouri Governor Mike Parson and First Lady Teresa Parson both tested positive for the coronavirus, the governor's office said Wednesday. The office said Teresa Parson was tested Wednesday morning after showing minor symptoms. Mike Parson was tested too. Both tests came back positive. Staffers who came into contact with the governor are being tested and awaiting results as well. The governor has canceled official and campaign events. His office said he's not experiencing any symptoms and that he continues to work from the governor's mansion in Jefferson City. Parson is the second governor to test positive for COVID-19 since the beginning of the outbreak, after Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt. Stitt recovered and shared a photo of himself on social media donating plasma to help other patients. They're not sure how helpful that ends up being in the end, but Parson ascended to the governorship in 2018 after his predecessor, Eric Greitens, remember him, resigned in the midst of a sex abuse scandal. He faces Auditor Nicole Galloway in November's election for a full term, one of the marquee gubernatorial contests on the ballot this year. Parson and Galloway have been scheduled to participate in a debate hosted by the Missouri Press Association on Friday, but that's likely to be canceled as Parson isolates himself while he recovers. And maybe that's actually a good break for him. Who knows whether he expected to perform well in that debate or not. I don't know. But an interesting development either way. And, I think that could be a message you capitalize on. Vote for me. I'm not the idiot who refused to wear masks and walked around saying it was all a hoax and then got COVID. I think that's a pretty strong message myself, but we'll see what the voters of Missouri think. Anyway, let's see. Other stories to round up. I mentioned, I think, just in passing or might have been I can't recall whether we were doing it on the air or during the commercial break, but Greg brought up the issue of the one we haven't talked about very much, but probably should have, the Florida law, provision of Florida election law, which basically they came up with as a way to try to continue to suppress minority votes in the state after so many other of their efforts were struck down by the courts. This one they actually managed to sneak by a Trump-friendly appeals court panel, and everybody was astonished that it was allowed to stand, and we didn't spend time on discussing how astonishing it was that this was allowed to stand because there was so many other astonishing things happening, both in the courts and elsewhere. But the law requires that, or I don't know, what's the best way of phrasing it? It permits the state to deny voting privileges to Floridians who owe fines and penalties to the courts in Florida. If you have, if you've been fined for any reason by the courts in Florida, unless you pay your fines off, you're not entitled, in their view, to the privilege of voting. This is why occasionally you hear people declare that there ought to be, or suggest that there be a constitutional amendment or something along those lines, guaranteeing people the right to vote, and everybody sort of feels like, well, that's something we already have, sort of, kind of, in this country, even though some people who say that are aware that there's no explicit statement of that being a right under the Constitution in the text of the document. But a lot of people are not aware of that. They just sort of feel like, well, it feels like a fundamental right. And of course we have it. And of course they're also open mentally at the same time to the idea, but yeah, it is a right, but there are some people who shouldn't have that right. It's an inconsistent approach, but Americans are capable of holding to both ideas at once. Anyway, down in Florida, the way they manifested it was, well, as they were being pressed, as many states now are, to reinstate voting rights for ex-felons, or even for, I guess, in some cases, for felons. Can you vote from jail in some states? I think you might actually be able to. I never really, agreed with that one all that much, but it's hard to fight about because people are, well, you're soft on crime if you don't want to keep punishing criminals, even though they're being punished right now. But like they're citizens of the country, whether you're punishing them or not. And if they're not citizens of the country, then I don't know. Maybe we should be treating them differently, or maybe we should let them go back to where they would rather be, even if originally they wanted to be in the United States. But if you're going to keep me in jail here, I might actually prefer being free somewhere else. That's a possibility. Anyway, the law was if you owed any fines, you weren't going to be allowed to vote. And I think a sensible argument being made in opposition to the law. This feels an awful lot like a poll tax. Like if you don't pay this money, you're not going to be able to vote. But the judges in the appeals court saw it differently and said, well, it's not a generalized tax on everybody that everybody has to pay. It's just if you owe money to the court because your own actions, as a result of your own actions, as punishment for your own actions, then you've got to pay that off. And if you're not going to fulfill this obligation to the state, then you're not going to be able to exercise that, as they would have it, privilege in this state. And although another weird part of it was, just to give you an idea of exactly how slanted the law was and the approach to interpreting the law, apparently another sticking point here was, well, all right, if you're going to make it so that you have to pay off your fines, don't you at least think that the state has to be under some obligation to tell people with some accuracy when they ask how much they owe so that they can pay it off and then get their quote-unquote privilege of voting back? And apparently, for whatever reason, the court in that case decided, that's actually not a necessity. They don't actually have to tell you how much you owe. You'll have to figure it out somehow yourself. And I don't know how that's even supposed to work logistically. But anyway, so it's been much in the news. It was much in the news when the decision was handed down, and rightly so. We just didn't get a chance to talk about it. And in reaction, in the last couple of days, I saw two very different people, letting it be known that they were going to step up to cover some of those fines for people. And a lot of people did suggest this. And they said, for instance, hey, Mike Bloomberg, since you wiggled out of your commitment to spend, what was it? I think he was on the hook for at one point he said, I'm going to spend $1 billion to defeat Donald Trump, I guess, if I get the nomination. And he didn't get the nomination. And then he decided, maybe I don't spend anything. And then he softened a little bit on that. And people who are Bloomberg fans were pointing out, well, he was spending a tremendous amount of money for you and me, a tremendous amount of money, maybe not so much for him, but a significant chunk on other important issues, like, for instance, one of the ones that's a top issue for voters, COVID-19 and awareness and education and getting people to mask up and do the right thing to suppress the numbers in the legitimate way. That is, to keep the actual numbers down, not just suppressing the truth about the numbers. Anyway, then he came forward with a smaller than originally expected, but still significant commitment to spend money in Florida, once it became clear that that was a key to perhaps winning the election in the election night projections, if Biden were able to carry it. So he committed to spending some money there. And then on top of it, I heard in the last couple of days that he was stepping in with the idea of paying off some of these fines so that people who were stuck behind this new law and unable to cast their ballots because of the fines, he would step in and pay them off. And the other very different person who floated the same idea, LeBron James. So I wasn't really expecting that one, but that sounded like a good thing to do and very nice. And I don't think it got amazingly, it didn't get the attention at least in political Twitter that Bloomberg's announcement did. And maybe it was the fact that Bloomberg's a politician and LeBron James isn't. Maybe in sports Twitter, nobody knows about what Bloomberg proposed. I don't know. But it didn't make as big of a splash in my timeline as the Bloomberg one did. So I retweeted the LeBron story and not the Bloomberg one to see if I could make a difference with that. I don't think it helped. But at any rate, the real story here is leave it to Republicans to step in and find a way to ruin that story. That is to say, two people who have done something very helpful and generous and saying, all right, you have this stupid law and there's no chance of getting rid of it before the election. Fine. I got a lot of money to spare. I'm going to pay off those fines, and then those people are going to be able to vote and your plot will be foiled. So Republicans have come back to foil the foiling. And I don't know that it makes any logical sense, but of course that doesn't make any difference to them either. Now, long story short on this one, actually the best summary of what appears to be going on here comes from the tweet of Jesse Walker, who I wouldn't ordinarily turn to necessarily for things like this. Books editor at Reason magazine. Not really somebody I'd ordinarily be following on these things, but these days lines are drawn in funny places. So Jesse Walker puts it this way: if I understand the state of Florida's position here is, and there's a tweet he's referring to here from a reporter in Florida who is reproducing in his tweet the letter. Who's it from here? Let's see. I got to open up Rivero's tweet here. It's a letter from the Florida Attorney General to the FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, opposing the idea of and possibly the legality of someone else stepping in and paying off these fines. But this is what's become really interesting. So remember that the case on appeal was, the problem is that this is a poll tax, and the court would not agree. They said it's just not sufficiently related to the franchise, the right to exercise the franchise, and not sufficiently related to elections per se. It's enforcing fines in this state and nothing more. But now the Florida Attorney General steps in and says, well, if someone steps in and pays off these fines for people, that is a potential violation of Florida law, Florida election law in particular, that they are trying to bribe people to vote is essentially what the position here is, and not just help them pay off their fines so that they can make up their own minds to vote, but rather bribing them to come to the polls and vote for a particular candidate, which I don't see how they make that leap, but they don't really care about logic. Jesse Walker, as he puts it, is, if I understand the state of Florida's position here, it is, remember that they had to argue in court, these fines have nothing to do with voting, so they can't be a poll tax. That's what got them off the hook with the courts. But now they say, if you help people pay them off, you're illegally interfering in an election, which of course connects those fines directly to voting and elections, which is exactly what they argued wasn't the case, so that they could squeak by with this stupid law in court. So, of course, these two things can't stand together, but it is Florida, so they might try to find a way for them to stand together. Danny Rivero, the reporter in Florida for WLRN, was the one tweeting this letter around, saying the Florida AG just sent this letter to the FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, asking them to look into potential violations of election law. Bloomberg's effort, and I guess LeBron's too, to pay off fines and fees of people with felony convictions is the target. And the letter says this, or at least in part. Governor DeSantis has asked that my office review recent allegations found in the enclosed September 22nd, 2020 Washington Post article and relevant law. My office has reviewed the following enclosed materials, and that's I guess all he lists here is the article he read, and then I guess the various Florida statutes that he thinks applies, and then the conclusion of the letter is not included in this tweet. Does he do the rest of it later? Yeah, here we go. The rest of the letter is here because it's the argument that makes sense. In let's see, in Florida, the Department of State Divisions of Elections, in responding to an inquiry by a political committee, stated, even otherwise innocuous offerings of an incentive simply to vote could run afoul of Section 104.045 or Section 104.061, or both, depending on the circumstances involved. That is, incentives could be offered to a voter in a way that would be designed to directly or indirectly cause the voter or a larger group of voters to vote in a particular manner. In such a case, the person giving the incentive could be guilty of violating Section 104.061 Florida statutes, which makes it illegal to directly or indirectly give or promise anything of value to another in casting his or her vote. After preliminarily reviewing this limited public information and law, it appears further investigation is warranted. Accordingly, I request that your agencies further investigate this matter and take appropriate steps as merited. It's interesting that the Florida AG, who is, by the way, Ashley Moody, has reached the conclusion that she can't reach a conclusion and needs the FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to do the investigation and come up with a legal conclusion. I mean, that's really her job, but I don't know. It's interesting that she doesn't just do it herself. I don't know whether that's indicative of inability or whether it's indicative of trying to push this off on somebody else so that they get tarred with it because she knows it's a ridiculous claim, or what. It's difficult to know exactly what she's up to here, but it's an interesting position for them to take. Remember, in order to make this law, to keep this law on the books, they had to tell the courts it's not a poll tax and there's no real direct relation between collecting the fines and the right to vote. It's just that you shouldn't get any of the privileges of citizenship in Florida until you're square with the state. And that's a fiction that I think even they didn't believe, but the court was willing to believe it. And now the idea then of somebody else paying it off. Well, if somebody else pays it off, that suddenly somehow directly connects it back to an election, and not just to an election, but an incentive to vote in a particular way, which even by itself isn't clear. So two very tenuous connections, both aimed at reconnecting two issues that they had to swear before the courts like a week or two ago weren't connected. It's a little bit complex, but if you give it a minute or so, or you don't even need to give it a minute, I'll tell you what's happening. It's happening in Florida. Is it going to make any sense? No, it's not. All right, let's see. Moving on to another of the small bore issues of the day, since the whole first part of the show was about how we're not going to pay attention to the biggest issue, the scrapping of the Constitution. How about this? The New York Attorney General's office has won a big victory in getting the courts there to agree that Eric Trump, who they seek to subpoena in their investigation of the Trump Organization, will not be allowed under New York law to insist that his deposition be put off until after the election. The court's not particularly interested in the fact that he says he's very, very busy helping his father run for president. Of course, there are many reasons why I would agree, and not the least of which is recall that ostensibly neither is Donald Trump involved in running his own old businesses, but his sons, in taking over for him, are ostensibly not at all involved in the business of running the government or the politics. But of course, they've ignored that part of the supposed settlement, which was never really operative anyway. So it's not surprising that a judge wouldn't be convinced by this. You're not supposed to be involved in the politics anyway, and the idea that you're working 24/7 while your dad's out golfing on his election is a little bit difficult to believe. So here's the write-up of it from Courthouse News, accusing the Trump organization of stonewalling an investigation that remained confidential for months. New York Attorney General Letitia James sued the president's business, his son Eric Trump, and their associates on Monday to force compliance. Nothing will stop us from following the facts and the law wherever they may lead. That's nice. For months, the Trump organization has been making baseless claims in an effort to shield evidence from a lawful investigation into its financial dealings. They have stalled, withheld documents, and instructed witnesses, including Eric Trump, to refuse to answer questions under oath. Revealed on the eve of the Republican National Convention, the Attorney General's months-long probe has been investigating whether Trump and his businesses improperly inflated the president's assets on annual financial statements to secure loans and obtain economic and tax benefits. She says Eric Trump refused to show up for a subpoenaed interview on July 22nd. That's why we filed a motion to compel the Trump organization to comply with our office's lawful subpoenas for documents and testimony, James added. These questions will be answered. The truth will be uncovered because no one is above the law. Hooray. That sounds good. As the Attorney General alleges, the Trump Organization's counsel pulled the plug on Eric Trump's testimony 2 days before his scheduled examination. Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, had agreed to an interview the prior week, and the company complained that the Attorney General's questions go beyond the scope of its civil inquiry, according to the memorandum. James said she assured the Trump Organization on July 21st that her office does not currently have an open criminal investigation into these matters and had not coordinated with another criminal law enforcement agency on matters related to this investigation. If at any point we become aware of information that prompts this office to open a criminal investigation or referral, we will advise counsel and proceed accordingly, she added, asking the attorneys to reschedule Eric Trump's interview the following week. But the memo says the Trump Organization wouldn't budge. We cannot allow the requested interview to go forward, pursuant to those rights afforded to every individual under the Constitution, it replied 6 days later. What is that right? The right is apparently, in their view, to convenient scheduling, which is not really one of the rights we are guaranteed under the Constitution. Larry Rosen, a partner with the law firm of LaRocca, Hornick, Rosen, and Greenberg, represents the Trump Organization, Eric Trump, and others. He's got about 50 lawyers on this. He didn't immediately respond to email requesting comment. New York's Attorney General has been looking into Trump properties. There are Seven Springs Estate, which is a 212-acre mansion in Westchester. 40 Wall Street, the lower Manhattan building that Trump incorrectly boasted was downtown Manhattan's largest after the 9/11 attacks, right? Trump International Hotel and Trump Tower Chicago and Trump National Golf Club Los Angeles. An interesting mix of properties. In a 68-page memorandum, James provides an early glimpse of what her investigation found. Just in case you're interested, valuations of Seven Springs were used to claim an apparent $21.1 million tax deduction for donating a conservation easement on the property in the tax year 2015 and in submissions to financial institutions as a component of Trump's net worth, the memo states. Eric Trump, in addition to being the president's son, serves as the Trump Organization's executive vice president and as Seven Springs LLC's president. Earlier this month, James sought to disband the National Rifle Association. She's been active in a lawsuit that accuses the gun group of fraud, and her office previously shuttered the Trump Foundation, securing a $2 million settlement with the president's former charity. Along with the Trump Organization, the proceeding James initiated on Monday in Manhattan Supreme Court names as defendants the president's son, Eric Trump, DJT Holdings, LLC, DJT Managing Member, LLC, Seven Springs, LLC, Morgan, Lewis, and Bokius, LLP, the land use attorney Charles Martabano and Morgan Lewis partner Sherry Dillon. You remember Sherry Dillon was the attorney who showed up at that fake news conference where they had all the manila envelopes filled with blank pages alleging that Trump no longer had anything to do with any of his businesses. All right, so she's named too. Filing her initial position under seal in Manhattan Supreme Court, James seeks permission to keep nearly 10 filings and exhibits secret as of press time. Assistant Attorney General Matthew Coangelo filed a 48-page affirmation, heavily redacted, to protect the office's ongoing investigation. The document makes repeated reference to financial statements by Trump's accounting firm, Mazars, which has the president's tax returns and other documents requested by Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance for an ongoing criminal probe. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Let's see. Here's an odd story. I wasn't planning on necessarily going in this direction, but Rebecca Roman sends us a weird one. Can we take a short detour on this? Good question, she asks in connection with this. I wasn't expecting this question either. Don't they have washing machines in Israel? Well, that's a real question. Now you'll find out why. I thought contextless, it was pretty interesting and funny. She includes here the tweet from John Hudson. Who's John Hudson? Well, let's just check it out here. Got to open it in the other format. A Washington Post reporter covering diplomacy and national security. And John asks a pretty good question here, or sets up a pretty good question anyway, from Rebecca. Why would she ask such a question? Here, a new report on a unique habit of Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't know. Do I want to? I kind of am amazed by the story, so maybe I'll read the full. No, maybe not. We should just move on from this. The long story short version of this from John Hudson. What is this unique habit of Benjamin Netanyahu? When he travels to the U.S. on diplomatic trips, no word on whether he does this in other countries, he often brings bags and suitcases full of dirty laundry for his U.S. hosts to clean, said U.S. officials. It has caused much eye-rolling at Blair House. Blair House is the very finely appointed, nice, fancy little mansion that sits across the street from the White House, across Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House, which is where visiting dignitaries like this would stay on a trip like this. And I guess he just shows up with laundry, which I guess, I guess because they host people for days or maybe even a week or so at a time, I guess I never really thought whether or not Blair House would require laundry facilities, but I guess they would at least have to wash their napkins and tablecloths. But, I never thought about diplomatic laundry. And the need to wash it. But now I question, does Netanyahu show up in other countries with laundry or just the United States? Is there a laundry product that he particularly loves that's available in the U.S. for washing his clothes? He loves the scent, and my clothes are so soft, and we can't get this. There's no Downy in Israel. I don't know. I'd love to know what the actual reasoning is behind it, even if it's just a matter of I'm lazy. And in the United States, they have a facility with laundry in the place they put me. And when I visit, whatever, take your pick. When you go to the UK, they put you up in this place. It's a palace, but it's got no laundry. I don't know. I'm just curious. So John Hudson actually wrote the piece about this. It can't be that long, right? And how much investigating can you do on something like this? I just find it interesting. Now, some of the other rest of this article is about extraneous materials outside of the very important laundry story. Is there any explanation here? Now he arrives with all of these bags. The clothes are cleaned for the Prime Minister free of charge by the U.S. staff, a perk that is available to all foreign leaders, but sparingly taken advantage of given the short stays of busy heads of state. The Netanyahus are the only ones who bring actual suitcases of dirty laundry for us to clean. It's like having your kid come home from college. That's expected, though, from them, and it's not really expected when the Prime Minister of Israel shows up. But, I guess they got to have laundry facilities, and making it available to the heads of state or visiting dignitaries makes some sense. I spilled something on my suit or on my shirt, and I have a meeting tomorrow, and can you clean this up? Do they have dry cleaning as well? Anyway, that's what they do. Then they're the only ones who show up with suitcases full of laundry and basically make a laundromat run of it. Israeli officials denied that Netanyahu overuses his American host's laundry services, calling the allegations absurd. They are. That's true. But they acknowledge that he has been the target of laundry-related accusations in the past. So you have that going for you, accusers. In 2016, Netanyahu sued his own office and Israel's Attorney General in an effort to prevent the release of his laundry bills under the country's Freedom of Information Act. The judge sided with Netanyahu, and the details of his laundry bills remain secret, pending an appeal in the Supreme Court. Wow, he's got real issues. The relatively minor accusation joins a longer list of corruption allegations that have threatened the 70-year-old leader's hold on power and triggered protests in Israel this month. And here it gets into serious issues that are of no interest to us by comparison to the absurd-sounding and therefore entertaining charges about laundry. But yeah, he's also accused of accepting nearly $200,000 worth of gifts from business executives, including cases of champagne and boxes of cigars. Yada, yada. Probably all true. It's just I find the laundry issue fascinating, and especially if you've already gotten in trouble for it once, the idea of continuing to risk ridicule and exposure over laundry, sort of inexplicable to me. But I guess some people just really want to get caught. All right, follow up on another story. We got an inkling that this was true a few days ago, maybe a week or so ago. And then I also got more confirmation that this was the case a few days later. I put it away, haven't gotten back to it yet. The tweet I have for you is from Baman Kalbasi, the New York and UN correspondent for the BBC, who says, following Politico's story about the doubt that South African officials cast on the initial story that U.S. Ambassador to South Africa, Lana Brooks, had her life threatened by, who was it? Did they say that it was the Iranians who were allegedly targeting her? Once that was called into question, there's just a little bit of extra follow-up here. South African officials say they have now spoken with U.S. counterparts on the claim that Iran wanted to assassinate the American ambassador in South Africa. They say the intel that the U.S. side shared in supporting their claim is, quote, not sufficient to sustain the allegation that there is a credible threat. So that's basically the conclusion of this thing. Anyway, just wanted to sort of point that out, that official sources in the intelligence game in South Africa say, not only have we seen nothing, but we've now examined what the U.S. brought forth as proof that their claims were true, and we would adjudge it insufficient to support their claim. So I think that's pretty interesting as well, and worth filing away. Now you have some closure on that. Here's another story that I guess I'll share with you. Just, again, peripheral. Everything's peripheral to the President of the United States refusing to guarantee a peaceful transfer of power following the election. But why not pick up the pieces around that he's sprinkled around in his disaster traipsing through our history and trampling over the Constitution. Sure. New York Times piece from back on the 18th that I didn't get a chance to discuss with you. An interesting example of Trump's incompetence, once again sabotaging his own election efforts, and in fact his own efforts at governing as well. And the few and far between are these efforts at governing, and the fact that he would ruin it is remarkable all by itself. A deal on drug prices undone by White House insistence on, quote, Trump cards, which are exactly what they sound like. That's the headline. The subheader, the White House and the pharmaceutical industry were nearing a major deal, as he would say it, a major deal to lower drug prices. He's constantly boasting about his ability to do that and to get that done. Of course, 3 years in, he hasn't done it. But now he had it all planned for wrapping up and delivering just before the election. It really would have been, if not a master stroke. Well, we don't want to talk about strokes in terms of Donald Trump really ever, but okay. It really would have been, well, I don't know, a boost at the very least, a chance to talk about a perhaps significant and real accomplishment. But in his insistence in making the accomplishment seem Trumpian and larger than life, he actually blew the whole thing up because he's such a great deal maker. All right, so they were on the cusp of a deal with the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, they had it in hand, I would say, my reading of it, to lower drug prices. Then the administration demanded that $100 cash cards be sent to millions of seniors before the election, and the industry balked, and wisely so. I think Jonathan Martin and Maggie Haberman, everyone's most trusted reporters, put this together. After months of heated accusations and painstaking negotiations, because that's what he's into, the White House and the pharmaceutical industry neared agreement late last month on a plan to make good on President Trump's long-standing promise to lower drug prices. How did they do it? They put together this kooky deal, and I can't believe that they got everybody to the table and agreed on this one and then blew it up. The drug companies would spend $150 billion to address out-of-pocket consumer costs and would even pick up the bulk of the co-payments that older Americans shoulder in Medicare's prescription drug program. I mean, that's actually a significant thing. Then the agreement collapsed. The breaking point, according to 4 people familiar with the discussions, Mark Meadows, Mr. Trump's chief of staff, insisted that the drug makers pay for $100 cash cards that would be mailed to seniors, before November. I don't know if you can still do that. They would be called Trump cards. Get it? Trump. Because as some of the industry called them. I guess some of the folks on the pharma side said not only were they insisting that we lower drug prices, they insisted that we make direct rebates to seniors and that we do it crediting Donald Trump as opposed to crediting the pharma companies that were actually doing it. And I don't know how much credit I would give them necessarily, considering how many more billions they're sitting on, but they wouldn't even get that. It would be all to the greater glory of Trump himself. Some of the drug makers, of course, in addition to being insulted by this, bridled at being party to what they feared would be seen as what it was, an 11th hour political boost for Mr. Trump. The people familiar with the matter said. White House officials insist they didn't plan to emblazon the president's name on the cards. That I'll never believe. Which they envisioned sending to tens of millions of Americans to use for prescriptions. Trump, of course, has a long history of branding everything from skyscrapers to stimulus checks. So, regardless, one drug company executive said they worried about the optics of having the chief executives of the country's leading pharmaceutical makers stand with the president in the Rose Garden as he hoisted an oversized card and gloated about helping a crucial block of voters. We could not agree to the administration's plan to issue one-time savings cards right before a presidential election, said Priscilla Vanderveer, the vice president of public affairs at Pharma, the industry's largest trade group. One-time savings cards will neither provide lasting help nor advance the fundamental reforms necessary to help seniors better afford their medicines. That's actually true, and I'm surprised that they bothered to say it. For two powerful political forces that have often been at odds over the last 4 years, the prospect of a bargain offered coveted public relations victories. For years, the drug makers have long been criticized for sky-high, opaque pricing for products that are often far cheaper in other countries. With a deal, the industry would get to project public spiritedness in the midst of a pandemic, while Mr. Trump would be able to deliver an immediate, long-promised benefit to voters over 65, with whom he's faring considerably worse in polls today than he did in 2016. Now, neither side can claim bragging rights, much more costly, I think, to Trump than to pharma. White House officials pointed a finger at pharma, maintaining that divisions in industry ranks over the financing of the agreement undermined negotiations. That's precisely what Mr. Meadows told the trade group last month he would say if they did not reach a deal, according to a pharma email at the time. Judd Deere, the White House spokesman, would not comment specifically on the savings cards, but he noted that Mr. Trump had held back on an executive order the industry fiercely opposed, which would tie some drug prices to the prices paid by other countries, called most favored nation drug pricing. I still think that's a misapplication of the term of most favored nation, but at least it makes a little bit more sense to me now that it is at least in this context, the way it's explained. We want the same price for these drugs in this country that others enjoy in other countries. Of course, sometimes they enjoy better pricing in other countries because they're subsidized, but whatever. But notice the mechanics of the setup here. Trump basically said, I want you to lower your prices in the United States to the same as they are overseas where it's much cheaper. And if you don't, I will sign an executive order forcing you to do it. And I guess then the negotiations from there were, how about if we give you some sort of rebate, and we can pay $100 to every senior to help them with drug purchases. Okay, fine, but they have to be called Trump cards. Okay, fine, then we're just out of here, and you won't get that ability to make that announcement prior to the election. And I guess you could threaten us with the executive order, but like most of your executive orders, it probably won't work and won't stand up to court scrutiny anyway, so I guess go for it. All right. President Trump, the article continues, I stopped a little earlier than this after mentioning most favored nation drug pricing, which, I always thought most favored nation. My understanding of the terminology was that it was something that had to do with tariffs, and as between countries, if you impose a tariff of 10% on, wheat products from country A, but a 20% tariff on wheat products from country B. Country A is the most favored nation as among the two of them, and if you negotiate a new trade agreement with country B, which provides for most favored nation status, what it would mean is that now under the treaty, you charge a tariff against our wheat that is equal to and no greater than that which you charge the most favored, on the product of the most favored nation among your tariff schedule. So we go to 10% too. I've not seen it in connection with a private industry's pricing as among several countries. I don't know that it's the case that the drug companies sell insulin in Afghanistan at all. I don't know if they really do, but just to make some random picks, I don't know if they sell, maybe a more plausible one. I don't know if they sell insulin for lower prices in the UK because they favor the UK as a jurisdiction. I think they probably sell them at lower prices because it's mandated that they be sold at lower prices, and or that there are government subsidies that make it possible to sell them at that price, not that they just like one country better than the other. So it's a weird application of most favored nation terminology. Anyway, now the president is poised to link the prices that Medicare pays for drugs administered in doctors' offices to those paid even by social democracies in Europe, where all those prices are subsidized. He wants the same price, but without having to pay the subsidy, and that's not going to work out either. President Trump is working to ensure American patients are no longer forced to pay outrageously higher drug prices than those in other countries, Mr. Deere, the White House spokesman, said. President Trump signed 4 executive orders earlier this summer. However, he did not release the final executive order on most favored nation drug pricing, giving drug companies a month to come up with a counterproposal. Negotiations did not produce an acceptable alternative, so the president is moving forward. It appears then that the industry will have to confront the executive order it hoped to avoid. Last Sunday, and it would have been several Sundays ago now, 2 or 3 or more anyway, Mr. Trump released the order, which calls for the establishment of pilot programs tying some Medicare drugs to prices abroad. They are unlikely to be established before the election, and the industry is almost sure to file suit in response, and probably win. The administration has chosen to pursue the most favored nation policy, an irresponsible and unworkable policy that will give foreign governments a say in how America provides access to treatments and cures for seniors and people struggling with devastating diseases, said Stephen J. Ubi, who heads pharma. A little disingenuous in that. I don't think it's a matter of American freedom for, that's what the seniors are demanding as part of their, the Senior Americans Bill of Rights. I want to be in determination of how much extra I pay for these drugs, not foreign countries. I don't think that's really what they're thinking. Mr. Meadows' gambit illustrates the extent of the last-minute scramble by White House officials to score political victories ahead of November. With the president's response to the coronavirus widely criticized, the White House has grasped for other ways to impress voters. In recent days, Trump has extended a ban on offshore oil drilling off the coast of the southern states, unveiled a multi-billion-dollar aid package for hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico. We forgot to get around to deriding that properly as the most cynical thing I've ever seen. 2-3 years after the fact? That, now I'm going to aid them. And I'm sure they'll be so appreciative they'll vote for their favorite president. Let's see. Yes, and as they mentioned, not only aid for hurricane-ravaged Puerto Rico, some of whose residents have migrated to must-win Florida. He's also announced another $14 billion in aid to farmers, where that money's coming from, I'm not sure, and plunged into Middle East peacemaking with those fake deals we discussed a couple days ago. Some officials in the drug industry, though, said they found it mystifying that Meadows would play what they saw as political hardball with some of the same private sector companies that Trump is pressuring to deliver the October surprise he craves the most, a coronavirus vaccine. We could conceivably have vaccines being given out by numerous companies, and they're all world-class companies, as Trump told us. I should have read it in his voice. We could conceivably, so you'll know whether or not to believe it. Like I said that, and it made it sound like, oh, really? There could be a vaccine? Because a normal-sounding person just said that. Except if I read it to you as, we could conceivably have vaccines being given out by numerous companies, and they're all world-class companies. They're fantastic companies. Now, does it sound plausible? No. Well, that's what Trump told reporters last Wednesday, singling out Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna as he contradicted his healthcare advisors and asserted a vaccine could be widely distributed next month. Yeah, right. Even more puzzling is why the White House would not have taken a victory in hand that would have let the president extol his negotiating skills and crow about delivering for seniors. Instead, they end up unveiling an executive order on a weekend that drew little coverage and is far harder for people to grasp than industry-subsidized cost relief for consumers. It's objectively imprudent, said Liam Donovan, a Republican strategist. But when you need to change the trajectory of the race, you got to be willing to take risks. I guess that's one way of explaining it. In public, Trump and his campaign have targeted the drug industry. They aired a commercial over the summer, lashing greedy drug companies. That's hard to swallow. And the president himself has repeatedly complained about the high cost of prescription drugs. And here he is complaining in his goofy voice. Big Pharma, drug companies, he helpfully explains in parentheses, are advertising against me like crazy because lower prices means less profit. He wrote on Twitter at the end of July, when you watch a fake ad, just think lower drug prices, and then 3 exclamation points. Sure, obvious and logical connection. But while Mr. Trump was venting on Twitter, his aides were declining to implement his executive orders on prescription drug prices because they wanted to see if they could negotiate a more sweeping deal with the industry. When the eventual and tentative agreement fell apart, Meadows told Mr. Ube how the White House would proceed. In an August 28th email, read to the New York Times by an industry official, Mr. Ube outlined to the pharma board of directors what Meadows had told him at the White House that the White House would do if the drug companies refused to pay for the drug card. In addition to the most favored nation executive order, Mr. Ube said Meadows would convey to the news media what he termed external messaging, that the White House, quote, came close to an agreement with industry, but the agreement fell apart due to our opposition to share the savings with seniors. Pharma declined to comment on the internal email, but another industry official said, others said, while not every drug company was enthusiastic about defraying the costs of co-payments, the companies had collectively reached accord and we were willing to spend the money. It was the insistence on the cards, they said, that torpedoed the agreement. On a September 2nd phone call between Mr. Ube and the drug company chief executives that make up the pharma board, the deal collapsed. They would not agree to go forward with the card. Some on the board were uneasy with the concept because they did not think it was sound policy. Others in the industry had concerns about the costs, but where there was broad consensus was that it was inappropriate to help create such cards that close to an election. Another way of interpreting that whole article, another upshot here, another takeaway, pharma executives are more ethical when it comes to the conduct of this election than the President of the United States. It was the chairman and CEO of America's pharmaceutical companies that stepped in to put the reins on Trump's attempt to even more corruptly leverage the power of government for his own personal political gain in the upcoming election. And that's kind of an astonishing thing to realize. No one believes that they have lost their willingness to leverage campaign outcomes with corporate cash, but it is kind of amazing that there are limits, and they occasionally kick in, even if they don't register with the President of the United States, which is really kind of sad and frightening. Okay, we've gotten down to the end of the line in terms of our time here, and I want to see if are there any other quick hits that we might be able to fit in before wrapping up for the day. Probably not. Let's see. And one thing I skipped over today, more fun QAnon stories, and I thought I would at least take a peek at this one on our way out the door in the final few minutes here from Bloomberg, which helpfully reminds me that I've exceeded my article limit, so we'll look at it this way. The QAnon party, just something you might want to read over on your own. It's not a conspiracy theory. So what exactly do they mean here? Stephen Mihm, M-I-H-M, when he writes for Bloomberg. Quick taste of things in the article. It's tempting to view QAnon's rise as a threat to American democracy, and I like this point, especially with a believer poised to win a seat in the House of Representatives. That's a sticking point for me. But history suggests that conspiracy-based movements have been a part of the U.S. democracy since the nation's founding. Sort of an interesting historical review that suggests we've been here before. Maybe it suggests a way out of this. Maybe not. Maybe we're trapped in this cycle. Long before the modern Republican and Democratic parties held sway, a succession of others rose and fell. True, worth noting. In between, smaller fringe movements surged, often embracing some pretty bizarre conspiracies. Eventually, though, the QAnons of the past didn't take over mainstream parties. Rather, their entry into the halls of power led to their absorption, or alternatively excommunication, by more mainstream parties. That might be what sets QAnon apart in the end. All right. It's an interesting premise. Not one that we'll have time to explore, but at least I can throw it out there for your consideration. I'll include the article for you to read up on it. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, for a regular show. Ian Reifowitz, I expect, will be with us once again to discuss, any number of subjects, including upcoming articles, one or two of which he has shared with me. And, all right, well, we'll look forward to that tomorrow. And in the meantime, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam up next. And as you know, always got an interesting selection of stories, some of which will overlap with ours. Let's see what he's got on the menu for today. Let's see. Trump's vast and ongoing project to steal the election. Have you heard about it? Sounds like dystopian science fiction, but it is frankly a plan for an authoritarian power grab. You'll find out who said that. That was a quote for you. And then next, a major provider of software services to state, county, and local governments, including the online publishing of election results, informed the FBI it has been hacked. Can you believe it?
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Oh, look, by the way, instead of satanic BLM and Antifa arsonists, the huge wildfire near Los Angeles was in fact started by Southern California Edison Utility Equipment. Now, speaking of California, looks like they're ready to pull the plug on gas vehicles. Let's get the details on that. Stay tuned.